Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the SRC podcast. Joining me, Big M, as always, Double R, Mr. Rob Reese. Good evening, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good. It's playoff season rugby at last.
Finally, we should say. A few apologies. We did attempt a podcast last week, but Zoom wasn't playing ball. It had a nice little update, and our one and only Bucky, he's got some family issues to deal with, so he is not here to play the positive spin on Aberavan. So sorry, Wizards, but it's not looking good for you tonight. Okay, so straight back to last Thursday, televised game, or shall I say, on click. Bridgend against Llandovery. 34-33 to Bridgend, winning at the death. That last kick looks a bit iffy. If you don't ask me, you see the way it bends over the post. I'm,
Yeah,
I'm not too sure. TMO should have come in for there, 100%. But no, all credit to Bridgend. But I've watched that game back, and I don't understand how Llandovery have lost that. Just how they've played and the the way the game flowed. It didn't seem right for Bridgend to even be within a score. Never mind have the capability of winning it at the end.
yeah. Do you know, it was one of those weird games because I was actually really impressed with Bridgend and how they sort of set out straight from the off. Disrupted a lot of breakdown. I mean, Arthur Llewellyn, who was actually man of the match in the end, was absolutely superb. And I thought that performance from him sort of typified he was laying the path for everyone coming behind him. That they disrupted Llandovery. Um, yeah, they targeted the set piece and sort of the breakdowns and all the sort of your set structural forward play, and actually did Llandovery. They sort of pulled Llandovery into a Bridgend sort of game where it's very fringe rugby, offloads, getting your forwards, carrying in the loose, spreading ball wide as quick as you can. And don't get me wrong, Llandovery are one of those sides that can very much deal with that, and we seem to see Llandovery pull away out of nowhere, sort of midway through that second half, and he was thinking, here we go, this is that 60-minute barrier kicking in, Bridgend will side away. But despite the changes, and senior players coming off or coming onto the pitch, I mean, they changed in 9-10 combo, and you're sort of thinking, yeah, that's going to solidify it. Now that's 6 points in the bag, or at least 5 points. And then Bridgend out of nowhere just found that sort of extra gear to step it back up, which is probably what they've been lacking all season. They've done it against the lesser opposition in the league, those in the bottom half of the table. But we've criticised them quite a bit actually for not doing it enough against that top 4, 5, 6, if you want to, if you want to look at those above them. And what they actually did was for one of the first, well, probably for the first time this season against one of those big clubs in terms of top performing clubs, is put an 80-minute performance in, and that's why I think it was actually refreshing to see when Pricey's conversion went over.
Did it?
That yeah, do you know what? It's one of those ones that it did look. Hang on a minute on TV, but I think it's one of those
Yeah.
ones that's a bit deceptive because of the way that the camera angle was sitting. But you sort of felt, Holland, Bridgend deserve this. I I don't want to be too critical of Euros Evans and say as he disrespected the final fixture a bit with rotation. He's very clear on speaking around the game, around what he wanted to do in his vision around giving boys game time and switching in and out. But there's something in the back of my mind that's just saying, were they slightly disrespectful to Bridgend and thinking that they could probably edge their way over? Or was there a point that they sort of looked at this and went, well, looking, Newport have got Quins, Ebervale have got Swansea. Are we really going to get second place? And just, took advantage of the sort of the spare week that they had, knowing that they had the home quarter final, sort of in the bag. But yeah, I think Llandovery would be massively disappointed in the way they threw it away. Sounds a bit harsh, but the way they lost control of it is probably a better phrase. So all credit to Bridgend. Scott Baldwin has sort of always said that they're looking to play that more expansive game of rugby and sort of play a complete game, and their aim and belief is they can win the league. And at the moment, they're playing some really nice brand of rugby. and we'll get on to their prelim round. But you sort of back them to have a decent little run in now this next couple of weeks.
Yeah, even though they are in the bottom 4 in the wildcard round, that home fixture for a knockout, just winning that first one, the sort of confidence they can give you,
Yeah.
it does boost you forward. We see it with other teams, the first round of the knockout, they haven't been seeded. They're seeded, in the lower end, so they only get a one home game, and you just see it how much it can build. So that is a massive positive. Them in terms of actual gameplay, there was quite a few players from the Llandovery side that did impress. Jack Davis with that 80-meter try assist. Now it was as if we just playing for fun. Same as Tommy Lewis. He came back into that team and just showed one of the big reasons why he was, on form and possibly tipped to go on a summer tour with Wales last year. He absolutely ran that Bridgend defence ragged. 2 tries, 2 try assists, and you can argue he actually assisted one of his own tries with a little 1-2 before he went over. So there are still a lot of positives for Llandovery. I think it has been a bit of a weird one, this run-in, because I'd probably say apart from Newport, obviously I know for reasons regarding their schedule with Ebervale, but Cardiff, Ebervale, and Llandovery have sort of rotated these last few games. I mean,
do you know what? I was thinking that before this weekend was sort of in, and then once we had all the fixtures, all the results come in, obviously, Cardiff losing and sort of Ebervale losing the Aberravon and the Newport game sort of the week before, Llandovery obviously losing Bridgend on the Thursday and having lost to Swansea recently as well. It's very much interesting how the table has flipped in terms of who the form guide is with, because Newport looked decent, and we get onto that. But as we say, Bridgend not get they feel like a top 6 team to me. Aberravon snuck that 6th spot, and maybe some scheduling helped them out there over Bridgend. But yeah, 6 wins, 40 points. You're sort of going, Bridgend seem better value than that, I'll be honest. They really do.
I'm not going to argue with that. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they come out in the game against Swansea. So on to our next game, and this does take us into the Saturdays now. If I could ever get around to my screen playing nice. So another big game. What was it? First against 5th. So Pontypool hosting Cardiff. Now Cardiff off the back of losing at Cap to Llandovery, you'd have thought, first wasn't mathematically assured, but it was because of the try count.
Yeah, it was. Ebervale needed to outdo, so Cardiff needed 0 points, and Ebervale needed the better Cardiff's try count on the day by 20. So it's like basically it was done. It was a tick box exercise, but yeah, 47-27. I don't think anyone really thought it'd be that sort of game, right? It was a strong Cardiff team. I think the only player that they notably missed was probably Mackenzie Martin, that they've been regularly having recently. But Pontypool probably only had 1 drop in, Cummins in the second row. So it wasn't like this was an unbalanced fixture, a team sheets and came out and it was all regionalised. But yeah, this is again, it's one of those interesting fixtures, because you sort of feel, well, what are Cardiff doing at the moment? Do they feel as strong as, or are they as strong as we think they may be? Obviously, they've managed to basically hold 1 or 2 throughout the season. Even when they had all their injury issues, the under-20s, obviously their backline and all that got called up, senior rugby. But Pontypool have absolutely done a job here. And I was speaking to Morgan Lloyd's dad after the game about it a little bit. It's speaking to his dad about how Pontypool sort of came out, especially in the second half, and put their stamp physically on the game. And that's what Pontypool like to do, right? Is I'll use the term bully opposition, and that's not in a thuggish or illegal manner, but they dominate, they get into people, they make you work hard physically. And as a result of that, obviously, especially around your 9-10 sort of combo, you're working hard mentally sort of thing. They've put some nice sort of teams out this season, and if they can stay fit, they've got a really nice sort of run in. Yes, they've got to go up the Llandovery. That's actually going to be an evening kickoff actually on S4C itself, not S4C Click, which would be a little bit of a bonus for everyone watching rugby that day. Obviously, Llandovery's coffers, I think, will take a little bit of a hit. But yeah, I think Cardiff have been a bit of an unusual one. Like you said, strong team, pretty much a first team. I'll be honest. Yeah, there was no discrepancies or major names there. You go, hang on a minute. They're really lacking in this position because of someone missing. And Pontypool have done a job on them, and that's very interesting. We mentioned about Bridgend and how the tables are sort of flipped in the form. But Cardiff have got a week off now. Obviously, Pontypool will as well. But Cardiff will be watching tomorrow, looking at their opponents, and probably trying to do a bit of a, what's the right term? Sort of a bit of a soul searching. I guess it's probably maybe a bit hyperbolic, but they've got to sort of go back to what they were doing well a couple of months ago, and sort of just playing that running rugby and sort of doing their own thing. At the moment, they seem to be going away from it, and they did it against Llandovery, especially in the second half. Last 20 was the kicking become erratic. They sort of lost their game management, the control of everything, and ultimately you can't do that, especially away to a team like Pontypool, who are notoriously difficult to beat at Pooler Park.
I'm trying to be as nice as I can to Cardiff. That 11 to 15 was different week on week, but even then, they're all players that have been involved all season. Tom Bowen, Cody Stone, Ocean Darwin Lewis. I mean, you could probably argue maybe Dewi Cross, Stefan Emmanuel comes into that back line, but even then, like for like, the difference in strength isn't massive enough. Now, I do have to give a lot of credence to Cardiff this season. I managed to catch up with Dan Fish last week. And so the coaching setup we had them down at the start of the season was obviously one Mr. Fish himself. We had Craig Everett, then you had Josh Turnbull and Nick Fish in there. And both Josh Turnbull and Nick Fish left during November. And they haven't really replaced them either. They've managed to get Rory Thornton come work on the line out. Mark Thomas, obviously, their prop has been working player coaches on the scrum. And then, Tom Haberfield has been doing skills work. So they haven't had a proper forwards coach since November. So the fact that they've had such a good season with obviously all the extenuating circumstances against them is quite unbelievable. Now, for Pontypool, it was more or less the same for them as it was the top four. They knew they were picking up fifth. There was never even a remote chance that they weren't going to, drop to sixth or even come up to fourth, which, might be sad, but, it is what it is. So it was nice to see a performance like this from them. Obviously, I'm just trying to look on over the squad now. They got, Tuckley, Lucid prop. I think that might have been his first start of the season. Obviously, Cummins, that you've already mentioned. If these boys are to stay in and around the squad, then, perfect. But if not, you're kind of thinking, well, have they rotated or they helped out the Dragons to their own at their own expense, because they do have to go to Llandovery, and especially with this gap week, surely you'd want to get your best 23 on the field. So that's my only worry for Pontypool. How many changes are we going to see going into that knockout round?
But I think that's just it. They've had a couple of key figures miss games this year, not for extended periods, but we've seen where Morgan Allen misses a game and they severely miss him, or Mikey Herbert misses out, or Scott Matthews. It's very rare you lose 2 or 3 of those, if at all. But it's like if one of those goes down, it severely hampers how they, those 3 players probably typify the Pontypool attitude, that ruggedness, in your face, not on the same level, but that Richie McCaw living life on the edge, in the referee's back pocket and, at the breakdown, making a nuisance of yourself, making it physical, without turning it dirty. There's no stamping or bloody eye gouge, crap like that going on. But they like to get into teams, and it's going to be interesting, as you say. Is this bye week for the top six a good or bad thing? And I'm not entirely sure, because yes, for some sides they desperately need respite. Schedule dictates or injuries dictate they need that fortnight off from obviously the weekend to their next fixture. But beside like Pontypool, does it give them an opportunity now for the likes of Cummins or say Dylan Kelleher Griffiths to come back in and have a couple of training sessions? Morgan Lloyd is regularly training with the team as well. All the Dragons boys, do they get a chance to put a couple of extra sessions in, gel a bit more with the team, sort of, and add that extra little bit of sort of oomph that they're going to need at Church Bank. But yeah, I think this has put Pontypool in a really good position, I'll be honest.
And I think more credence again to Pontypool in this. This is the first time that, if I'm reading my little matrix correctly, that Cardiff have lost to a 6-pointer. So in the league, I need to reiterate that. So
I'm just trying to think, what was the Llandovery away result? Because they didn't. Did they get the 6-pointer there?
no, this is like the only loss. Cardiff, 48-43, Llandovery, 27-20, Newport. They were the home losses. 31-19, Quins, 32-20 against Ebbw Vale. Yeah, this is the only 6-pointer they've conceded in the league this season. So
I'm just
perfect
trying to think
time.
what about the 50-pointer. But of course, I'm thinking the other way around. I'm thinking of Llandovery's fucking loss, aren't I?
Yeah, you are, and there's your mouth going again. Oh, and 8 games
Yeah.
only now.
Cancel the
Oh,
podcast. Cancel the podcast.
we got to. It's
Ah,
done. It's over. We're
fucking
cancelled.
hell.
Okay, next game up, we've got Carmarthen Quins entertaining Newport. And before this game, there was still an opportunity for Quins to pinch that 6th spot. Obviously, we know after all the results now that didn't happen. But going into the game, they knew this was a chance. So it's hard for me to see what the plan kind of is going into
Yeah, I
this
think
game and these games, just because they've had quite a few academy players from the Scarlets, and they've had senior boys in Charlie Titcombe and Archie Hughes step down against Bridgend, got the win against Bridgend, but then neither of them involved this week against Newport. They had another Scarlet in Ellis Payne, who's, to be fair, has been playing most of his season at 15 for Newcastle Emlyn, and Lucas Sotaro at halfback. I'm not using this as a reason to justify, quite an impressive scoreline for Newport, 56-21 away from home. I mean, that's quite frankly, that's got to be probably the worst hammering we've seen in the league all season. And I want to try and find some positives in here for Quins, but I'm really struggling. So you're a big fan of Newport rugby, so run through with them. They found a bit of form now. They obviously took Ebbw down, and they've carried on right here.
yeah, I think this, like I said, it was a disappointing result from Quins. They needed a 6-pointer to get the top six, so it was always a tough ask. But ultimately, it's probably, well, sorry, they would have needed the 5-pointer depending on Aberavon's result in the end. But you're sort of looking at it going, where are these two sides? Quins have had a really good spell recently. They might not have had all the results. The Ebbw result was a 6-pointer, but was actually really telling. It was the last 10 minutes. Other than that, Quins disrupted really well. They got up in the faces. That the scrum caused problems. The line-out's been going well. Lewis Morgan's been backing on the try scoring sort of sheets. He's wrong on your try scoring sheets, WRU. Look at your numbers again. I'll let you deal with the stats, Matt. But yeah, it's for Newport. They're in a really sort of a bright patch at the moment. They seem to have that balance again of weapons are back. Johnny and the boys adding a bit more depth in midfield. Lloyd Lewis is back fit, and even though he looked like he cramped up a bit late on in that Ebervale game, but that looks like that all it was cramp rather than a hamstring or anything like that. And yeah, they look dangerous. Jack Lloyd's, in typical me fashion, has actually put in his best probably 2-3 games of the season back to back. And now the kicking game now is, they're not missing Matt O'Brien all of a sudden. I'm hearing people go, see, if we had Obi in this squad, we'd be really top quality. I think we're seeing Newport now at their best this season. And I think the good news is for Black and Amber supporters is it's at the right time of year. Like I said, they get a week off, and then they'll be going out again, Aberavon, going down to Spitley Stadium again. So that's going to be an interesting one. But yeah, this result was slightly surprising in the manner, but it was done by half time. I mean, it was like 38-5 or something like that. I think it was at half time 38-3, 35-3, somewhere around there. And the game's done. Newport absolutely blitzed them out, out of the sort of the gun. And unfortunately, when that sort of happens, a side like Quins at the moment don't have that experience or the weaponry to fight back and claw anything into it.
No, you bang on, but Newport, they're 5 on the bounce now. They've picked their form for the right time of season, and we said at the start of the year the two most complete teams in the league were Llandudno and Newport, and okay, there's been some wobbles from both through the season, but it's Newport that are probably looking the strongest, even though they finished third. It's these playoffs are gonna be a real test, especially considering everybody is involved. Quins do have to travel now up to RGC, a prospect they probably would not have even considered before Saturday. With obviously RGC facing Aberavon, they probably hope that if they're not going to get the job done over Newport, at least Aberavon will help them out on that side. But that did not go as planned. So that is going to be a nice juicy one to get our teeth into in just a little bit. So on to the next fixture, and we have your very own Ebbw Vale at home against Swansea on the back of 2 consecutive losses, which I believe is for the first time this season.
Yes, it would have been. Obviously, going into this game, they only had 3 losses in the league all year. Cardiff right at the start, was sort of that anomaly to kick it off. Pontypool away at Christmas. Another difficult one, and obviously trying to wrap things up in quick succession. Ironically, the Llandudno loss in the cup final has actually cost them a midweek at the game, so that's why they had to play Aberavon on a Wednesday night. Yeah, it was an interesting battle. I think you could see Ebervale were quite tired out the gate. There's a lot of tired bodies in there. I mean, it's a relatively similar size squad to everybody else. So looking on a 35 sort of point mark, it's a lot of their local talent sort of in the mix. Not huge numbers in terms of dragon allocation. I think it's officially 5 were allocated specifically for the season, and they've had Harry Wilson parachute in against Bridgend a couple of weeks ago, but he hasn't played since. So Swansea, probably in the opposites, have sort of got a few players back. They lost Josh Phillips in warm-ups, so Tal Rees had to come in and start. So that probably hindered them a little bit. Bit of a battle of the fly-offs, to be honest, to get you going. So Evan Lloyd drops out for Ebbw. Josh Phillips drops out for Swansea, and that probably sums up why the game lost a bit of shape. But there was a lot of errors sort of creeping in, and there was a lot of different things going on, that sort of handbags and just things breaking down, set piece wasn't quite going right. And that's what Swansea did well. They kept in the game. Ebbw couldn't get their exits right early doors. They allowed Swansea pretty much straight back in after a first try, the rolling maul. Again, Joe Franchi, 3 tries in this game, 3 more by an Ebbw hooker this season. And in fairness, it went 21-12. You sort of think 2-score game. Ebbw lacked a bit of clinical edge inside the 22. They didn't have many opportunities. Obviously, Winnie Bayeux disagrees with that.
Yeah.
The little caterpillar. But yeah, Swansea fought back really nicely, I'll be honest. And in the end, they probably got what they deserved out of the game, which is a point. They did deserve the point for the disruption. But I think from Ebervale's perspective, they won the Shield. You know, that was the final home game of the regular season. 9 games. They've obviously won them all. They've defended the Shield at 7 of them, because I think they had RGC or Llandovery before them. But obviously they won every game, so it's actually quite fitting that the only side to win every home game wins the Shield. Obviously they won the 2 home games in the Cup as well. Not that those were with the Shield, but again, quite fitting. And yeah, it's so they done the job. 4 points was enough to stop Newport from catching them as it was. They couldn't catch Cardiff, let's be honest. There's not going to be a 20 try game in this league, never mind outdoing Cardiff by 20 tries. So that was game set and done before kick-off. And yeah, I think they did what they wanted to do, was retain the Shield, you know, for another game and win it for the season, and just get that second spot, which means you get a home semi-final, which I believe Jason Strange was one of his targets right at the start of the season. Was if they can get that home semi-final, there's a very strong belief that this side can go on and win the league. You know, obviously. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's their 2 aims. They tick them off in a bit of a turgid affair at times, I'll be honest. I think the officiating was very scrappy and didn't help any flow of the game. And yeah, generically not a great game to watch, but I think job done for Eberville.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to Eberville in a minute, but I want to talk about Swansea, as we have quite a bit these last couple of months. They've only lost the 1 home game this calendar year, which was against Newport in the Cup, and Eberville and Pontypool are the only teams they've lost to in their last 7 games. Obviously, Eberville at home in the Cup, Pontypool away, and obviously this game now. Note that Pontypool away game was 41-31. So incredibly tight games. And
yeah. This is what we said, though, right? We said before Christmas, Swansea are building things that they put a 40 minutes in a game. Sometimes it'd be 40 minutes in the middle. Sometimes it'd be the first half. Sometimes it'd be the second. They were a bit topsy-turvy. But it's like Christmas. They did before Christmas, and this is the other thing. They've walked away 4 wins in the league, and I believe 1 in the Cup. So that's 5 wins. They didn't have a win before Christmas. Yeah, this isn't a side that's eking out a win every 2 months. They didn't have a win before Christmas. Now, they beat Aberafan 10-0 in sort of the Boxing Day, New Year double derbies. They then take on a few good sides, put in those 60 minutes, 70 minutes again, but come short. You've mentioned the Pontypool scoreline there. They've done Llandovery over. And Llandovery didn't rest players for that game. That's not any, Llandovery did this or that. Swansea beat a very good side, 6 points, absolutely slaughtered them. And like you said, there's only 2 sides that have gone down there and won, and they're playing some good rugby as well. You could see they really wanted to play the rugby. They just couldn't quite get it together. Harry Houston was at the heart of absolutely everything. I mean, they was playing 2 players deep, Houston and Cornelius. If there was a fly half back, if Tal Rees was sitting deep, he would take the ball off an Ebu exit and literally feed Harry Houston. There was no fly half movement there at all. And in fairness, the 1 try he scored was actually a really nice try. And I think it was actually the return, and you're going, well, literally supporters on the bank were going, that 15, he's dangerous. That's, they're going to hurt us in the backs if they get it going. And the same with Cornelius. He's moved around a bit in terms of positions this year. He was originally named in midfield against Eberville back in sort of the first St. Helens fixture. But again, looked busy when he got on the ball, finished his chance off really nicely. So that'll be a nice little positive for Swansea, as they played some good rugby given difficult conditions of opposition, slick ball underneath, that sort of thing. And yeah, I think there's a lot that Hugh Gustafsson and the boys can take out of this game, despite that idiot Gareth Davis on Facebook, who, if anyone doesn't actually keep up to date with Swansea on Facebook, he's like a perennial neglective abuser that's anything that comes out of a loss is negative, and you don't hear him when you win, sort of thing. So it's been quite interesting watching that unfold. But this is definitely something Swansea can be. They can be proud of the way they turned it around from, not and take a lot of positive out of performances like this. Definitely.
Yeah, and obviously they have got the game tomorrow night, which is the Thursday night game live on Espedrec against Bridgend. We do have the team sheet for that, so that's going to be nice to have a little dive into in a bit. I just said I was going to come on to Ebbw Vale, and we know Ebbw are predominantly a forward-based team, but it does seem a larger and larger percentage of your tries are coming from the maul. And obviously early in the season, you get tries from backfield, you get a few in around, but it seems as though I don't want to call you a one-trick pony because you're obviously quite not. But it seems you're relying on a lot, and if that gets taken away, like it did a bit in the Llandudno Cup final, as an Ebbw Vale fan, do you have concerns there?
I think I think there's been a noticeable pattern ever since that. I think it was the Bridgend game originally, the one down at the Brewery Field right at the start of the season. John Evans goes off and Ethan Phillips go off both around that time of the season, and they both out for 6 months, pretty much. 4 or 5 months, I think it was, and then we've slowly seen them return. There, all of a sudden, you lose your nine and your command, your distributor in midfield as well. You're not just losing a powerhouse or something like that. Dom's the powerhouse, Dom Franchi. Ethan Phillips is the distributor in that midfield line. You add in then recent injuries, obviously, only for this game, but Evan Lloyd's suffering with a bit of a niggle. He's now out for the Swansea game. He should be returning, I think, back in a fortnight's time. Ryan Gardner goes down a fortnight to go in HIA, so he's still out. Ewan Bowden went off early in that Carmarthen game, at home a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, Harry Rees-Weldon is one of the 5 allocated players. He's been out with an injury ever since the England under-20s game. So that's just an additional player that you're really struggling with. You get a great replacement scrum half in Griff Tuff from Glamorgan Wanderers. Looks really dangerous, and he did a tib-fib snap, I think it was against Swansea, took him out for ages. He's out of his cast now, but all of this sort of adds up in. There are some positions Ebbw Vale will want extra depth. I mean, Josh Malson started the season as backup fly half. He's no longer around the squads. There's a lot of depth quality that they got to look at, and tired legs and all of that come into it. But I think the one thing that's going to be pleasing, other than the fact that pretty much all of those players are either going to be back for, the first quarter final, or hopefully before the end of the season, depending on how long it sort of lasts, is the Maul tries is probably quite deceptive. The Swansea tries were 3 from the hookers, obviously 2 from Franchi, 1 from Pumpy Morris after Joe did his 40. Again, Joe wasn't feeling very well before that game, and it just sort of sums up where Ebbw Vale have been this past sort of week. And it's deceptive in how they run them all. So if anyone's been watching Ebbw Vale closely this season, they'll notice just how quickly the back line commit into a maul. It's like that's their one weapon. That's they realise that, and I'll be honest, like nobody can stop. I mean, if Joe got the try from the maul against Llandudno in the cup final, you lose a few people here or there and it sort of tails away. But that's sort of been the one constant potent threat that they've held. I think what we've seen against Bridgend was some, at home recently is a few players back, some really expansive killer rugby. Quins, they finally managed to sort of let loose. Didn't really show it against Newport. And Aberavon, they probably showed it a little bit, but weren't clinical enough. So I think it's definitely something they've got to be cautious of, is not to have this over-reliance on the maul and that side of things. And ironically, I think if anything has struggled recently, it's been the scrum has been penalised Newport's, I don't think there's been a great reaction in WRU HQ around Craig Evans' performance overall on that afternoon, from what I understand. But yeah, the scrum struggled there. The scrum as against Carmarthen wasn't great either. So it's a bit of a weird one to read, because, as you say, it's, you look at the tries and you're pushing nearly 30 tries this season from your first choice hooker, your second choice hooker, and penalty tries from them all. So it very much is difficult to say, well, where are these other tries coming from? But ultimately, I think there's a bit of positivity around this, and I think Ebervale are definitely one of the teams that needed this additional week off, and they'll sit back and see, obviously, whoever they face will be the winner of RGC versus Carmarthen.
And that brings us perfectly on to the last game of the round, which is RGC at home against Aberafan. And if you didn't already know, that RGC like high-scoring games, 59-38.
Not even a 100-pointer. Shocking.
It's not bad. It's not their best, like you just said there. But yeah, quite frankly, I don't know. I know John tends to make the joke by love for the attack coaches, headache for the defense coaches, but it genuinely is, when you're looking at a team that scored 9 tries, but they also conceded 6.
But you actually look at it, though, and it's Aberafan at half time with 24-19. Yeah. 5 points adrift. That's, Aberafan still scored 19 points in that second half, but I think at the moment, it's what we've sort of said quite a little bit, probably too often this season, is Aberafan are a bit sloppy in that midfield channel, the wide channels, when once sides start running at them. They sort of, and this will be especially disappointing, because the one thing they did well against Ebervale was shut them out. They, not in terms of a score, but they were shutting down a side that has been putting sides to bed and putting them away. There's a lot going on that sort of front. So you'd be disappointed that you've gone up north, looking to push on. Obviously, at this point, that 6th spot is still, completely up for grabs. Obviously, Bridgend had finished on the 40 points. Aberafan were looking at 41 at the time. So, Quins, what a time for the Dogs to kick off here. Obviously, they've lost interest in the podcast just as quickly as everyone else, I think. But yeah, this is just one of those games again for Aberafan. That second half collapse. 35 points conceded in the second half. Just absolutely tails away. The arrival of the subs bench has obviously not done them any favours. You only look at the second half and it's 35-19. Like, even that second half, RGC would have got a 6-pointer. Yeah. You know what I mean? So and this is the interesting thing. Actually, look at RGC in the table. They finished 8th, but they actually picked up more wins than Bridgend and Aberafan above them. But actually finished 3 points behind Bridgend, 5 points behind Aberafan. So I think there's a bit of a discrepancy with what we've said in terms of they're picking up the full 6 or definitely 5 at home and cutting teams to shreds. Ebervale being one of them, that they sort of cut loose and won with the last kick of the game. But they can't quite pick up these points on the road, which is where massively Quins travel up to RGC now this weekend.
Yeah, it's a weird one for RGC. Like we've spoken about, what does the surface do for them? And obviously their home ground has been really quite excellent for them. Obviously not the perfect record. They have taken, a few losses at home in the league, but it has held them through when they've picked up a few away wins. Like you said, 7 victories this season in, what is an 18-game season. That's none too shabby when you are, fighting for, top of the second half. Like
it is. It puts you in 6. If you go on pure wins alone, it puts you in 6. If you start thinking, well, they close that gap in terms of picking up the same ratio of bonus points as someone, say, like Aberafan, you can, they're way off closing the gap on Pontypool, but they're probably comfortably 6 if they buck the ideas up. But it's an interesting place to go, Irish, because they get a good solid home crowd. Obviously for obvious reasons, in a 4-hour trek, there's minimal to no away support. But they get a great home crowd. They get behind them, the surface. Billy McBride is one of the players of the season up there, if not their player of the season. I mean, he surpassed the 200-point mark already now this season, and is now on 80% accuracy from his kicks. So he's benefiting from their high scoring sort of games, and he's got his half a dozen tries, is it, to his name himself now this season. I think it was 5 before the weekend.
Yeah, he's been phenomenal scoring points wise. I mean, I'm looking up seven tries, 41 conversions, and 30 penalties. That's just
that's just it. 41 conversions. I mean, yes, some sides have split their kicking across 2 or 3, depending on how injured sort of their fly halves have sort of been. But there's tries in this RGC side. I mean, and in fairness, what they've actually done under Josh Leach is solid. It's very commendable. I mean, 8th in the table, again, it's a bit like Bridgend, probably does them an injustice because they've got more tries than 4 other teams. This should be the side that's sitting in 6th. They should be. You think about it, there's extra bonus points now, and RGC are the sort of team that should be running, they run teams ragged, they get themselves out the head. So I think that's their biggest work on now. Obviously, their season's not done yet. I mean, I think they will overturn Quins, and we'll get onto that now before the end. Spoiler, end of the pod ruined. So I think they'll be in the quarterfinals and travelling to Ebbw Vale. But I sort of think that they could be looking to do a little bit better next season, and this is definitely a platform for them to build on. I think we all predicted them to finish 10th at the start of the season. And they finished 8th with more wins than 4 other teams. So for me, that's a pretty commendable season, especially as long as they win this playoff. I think if they win this playoff, I think this has been a positive season.
Yeah, it has, and I know I went on a little rant earlier at the beginning of the season. I believe in RGC. I do believe in what they're doing up there, and it does show.
It doesn't. And sorry, Matt, go on.
No, if we do go by the league wins and some of the performances they've churned out against obviously the best teams in this league, it is quite frightening that if they could manage to put that together every single week, 80 minutes every single week, they could quite easily be up with Pontypool trying to break that top 4.
Well, that's just it. I think you're right there. A lot of sides, they develop and they work off Bridgend, have worked with the college pathway and have built a very solid sort of club pathway there. There's Ebbw Vale have gone towards local talent recently and did a rebuild 3 seasons ago. There's quite a few teams in this sort of league at the moment that are in sort of restructures, and they're at different stages, of course. But RGC are at that first year of this, and as you say, it's one thing to say they're going to change the culture, we're going to change how we do things. They brought back some key players. It was all across our back line, They brought in several key names that were returning names. They haven't spent big bucks on trying to pull in big names from Sale and places like that are sort of dropping them down from pro rugby. But they've been wise around what they've done. I think if they get a few more, I think their front row's all right. I think if they get a few second and back rowers in that add something, that the big powerhouses, the out and out jackalers, I think they'd be missing Fackrell when he sort of missed a lot of his game time, especially at the start of the season. And Dan Owen, I don't think hasn't quite been at his best this season. I'll be honest, been playing well, but not. I think they just miss those sort of players that the other sides at the top, that top 6, top 5 maybe have got, and that's where they close this gap.
Yeah, I mean it's a bit of a double-edged sword for RGC because once they do get players of a certain standard, they do tend to leave. And okay, I know they don't have a great amount of game time between the two of them, but Dylan Alford and Tom Cottle, two second row back rows. They've signed with regions throughout since the summer. So two boys that have come through the RGC pathway. They're still both. I think they're still under 20s as of this season right now. You'd expect maybe another year or two of them to keep going, but they could quite easily. Cottle may end up turning out for the Rags next season, and Dylan Alford could be with Quins or even Llandovery. So it's hard.
Yeah,
It's hard enough for them being North Wales, and that comes with its own issues. But knowing once you get a player that's hit X standard, 99% of the time you're losing them. And it's a harsh reality for RGC, and one they'll obviously have to overcome. Kind of neglected Aberavon a bit by here. So just like I spoke earlier about, when you have the break week, you kind of won your strongest 15 or 23 the week before. They made 11 changes going into this match. Two of them in the 15. Two of those were positional. Obviously Ed Dunford and Scott Whitlock coming back in at halfback's not, exactly a negative. But, did they make the right decision by, going whole hog against Ebbw Vale in midweek? Obviously, they got the win and they got sixth in the end. But, they could have quite easily lost that game and beaten RGC and then had a week off and gone full hog with the same 23 into the playoffs. So, have they... What do we think? Have they made a mistake with it, or is it, what risks? You got to add up the pros and the cons, obviously.
I'd like to say that there is a massive risk here. I think Aberavon are a side that sort of feed off continuity and a bit of sort of momentum this season. They're not a side that are pulling big wins out of nowhere. That's largely down to being a very young squad. They had a high turnover right at the start of the season, and Jason Hyatt's been, very vocal around that and what they're trying to build around local sort of Port Talbot's sort of talent, and they've done very well with that. And I think sixth place is actually a credit to those. I think it's difficult because obviously they played, they had the extra day's rest before the Ebbw Vale game. And then you're sort of going, well, actually, should they have made this many changes? And again, does it come down to a bit of availability at times? When you're traveling up north, especially if it's, if boys can't get 2 days off, because that's effectively what it is. Even if you can drive back down, you don't want to be driving back down after a game and getting in at bloody 9 or 9 o'clock, if depending on where you live, possibly 10 o'clock. Or even later, depending on what time you sort of leave Colwyn Bay. But I think Aberavon might have needed a bit of momentum. I mean, they've got obviously, they get the bye week and then they go straight up to Newport Stadium to face the informed team in the SRC. So this is going to be a proper challenge in terms of what mettle they sort of have. They've got a few players who've recently come back and a few that they're sort of expecting back, I think, around this sort of next fortnight, which could be crucial for those. It's good to see the likes of Scott Del Neville was back. He said Dunford was starting again. Obviously, Geraint James, Luke Davis have both returned to the front row this season. Rowan Jenkins won't be back until next season. Ashton Evans has been central to absolutely everything they've done, so he's going to be crucial to start against Newport, and maybe that's just it. Maybe they didn't want to risk too much, knowing that they sort of had 6 in the bag. I mean, you look at it, they were past Bridgend at the time. Quins needed 6 points
against Newport,
or 5 points if Aberavon took nothing. So there's a bit of there's a bit of gamesmanship here, I guess, and obviously Jason will know his squad best and who needs to be rotated and sort of how tired the legs were. But yeah, I'm a bit surprised that Aberavon haven't gone into this looking for a bit more momentum, to be honest.
Well, that covers all the results from this past weekend. It's not the halfway point because we've only got a couple of games to preview in the wildcard round. So if you have made it this far, please like, share, subscribe, leave a review. Tell us how much you love Rob's beautiful face or voice, depending on what mode you are watching, listening on. So straight into the wildcard rounds, just the 2 games this week that will fill up the quarterfinal spots for a fortnight's time. Bridgend against Swansea is the Thursday night game live on S4 Click. We've got the Swansea team news. Have we had anything from Bridgend?
Nothing from Bridgend as we stand.
As we stand. Probably change as soon as we stop recording. That's normally our luck. So we did manage to get a quick catch up with Scott Baldwin. Spoke a bit about the Llandovery game, but it was more along the lines of they've built well throughout the season. They're playing the game they want to play, and it's just more of what they want to do and what they want to produce for their fans. It's if it wasn't for beating Llandovery in the manner that they did, I think I'd be back in Swansea considering their performance against Evu. So I really don't know where to put my money on this one. I'm hoping you can help me out, you.
Yeah, do you know what I think? And obviously, I may be slightly biased because Ebervale play the winner of the other prelim round. But I think Cardiff have drawn a bit of a bugger by it because they've probably drawn Bridgend and Swansea. Out of the 4 teams that were in the bottom 4, these 2 are the 2 form teams, both on a resurgence. Both have form for beating good teams. Llandovery. There's a pattern going here. And yeah, they're going head to head. So I'm hoping for a really good game of rugby, actually. They both play that sort of open, loose. Neither side has this big trundling pack. So I think it'll be very, open play, kicking game. Let's get some width on the ball. Definitely from Swansea's perspective, because I think Bridgend probably do edge the pack, especially around that back row sort of area. I think the difference here, and this is why I'm going Bridgend for the win, is I think Bridgend have shown that a little bit more consistency this season, and it's at the Brewery Field, and I just feel that Bridge are that sort of team that they like playing at home. That sounds ridiculous. Everyone likes playing at home, but Bridgend pick up these sort of results. I think last season they beat Pooler there. They pick up these sort of results, and you go, hang on a minute. They've beaten Llandovery here now, and they're sort of trundling along. 60 minutes against Ebervale, beat Cardiff there in the cup. You know what I mean? They've taken scalps or put in some good performances at home this season, and I think that's just going to see them over the edge. But it wouldn't surprise me if we have a bit of an RGC scoreline here. Maybe not quite 97 points, but I can see this being 35-30 sort of territory, quite convincingly. And I'm hoping Josh Phillips does start this game. Obviously, he's been named in the Swansea side, so it's going to be an interesting one. But at the moment, I'm leaning Bridgend, Mart.
Ooh, so if we do dive into that Swansea team, so 4 changes in the 15. Ewan Glynn and Tom Edwards create a new wing partnership. Yayan Cornelius, who was quite excellent against Everwill, has dropped to the bench. Aubrey and Template have swapped places at 9 yet again.
Yeah.
And
that's actually a big move, I think, Aubrey. Didn't mention him in the Ebervale sort of breakdown earlier, but Swansea looked a bit more direct when he came on. That's a good move.
Yeah. And the last one is Joe Greaves coming back into the side for first time in 4 weeks. So, he's played a pretty pivotal role for Swansea whenever he's been on the pitch. So, that is, brilliant for them. And at the start of the season, we spoke about Swansea and their woes. And we were looking at players who, have signed with them or whatever the word is from the buddy region. It escapes me at the minute. And they're still missing a fair few of them. Like Luca Giannini is one who signed, who started off really well and hasn't been here. Morgan Morse, obviously, he has been playing more with the Ospreys, but I don't think he's even played a game this season. I might be wrong on that one. So
right at the start, but as you say, there are a few. I am surprised that I know Tom Edwards has got quite a few tries to his name this season, but Cornelius off the back of such a good performance and he wasn't, he was not completely starved the ball, but it wasn't a constant feed to him for his tries. I'm really surprised at that. The other one I'm quite surprised at is Dan Germain. travelling reserve named. I'm surprised he's not in that 23. You know,
Yeah,
he's a big lad, Welsh under 20. He's had a really good tournament as well. So yeah, that's a really interesting one. And the same with Tal Reese, only named as travelling reserve, despite obviously getting a bit of game time from the get-go at Ebervale last week.
and unless it's a different Owen Thomas, that's a 6-2 split. So it does make you think. We don't get weekly squad updates. That is something that we're not going to promise, but we're going to try and maybe push for in coming seasons. But it is a hard one to really assess on the thinking. We haven't been able to get any contact from Hugh Gustafsson, unfortunately, so we can't even tell you any words of wisdom from that man's mouth. But I don't think I've seen enough to convince me the Swansea can do this, given what Bridgend have done recently. So it is a double up for Bridgend, and that brings us on to the other wildcard game. You kind of already set your stall out for here already, haven't you?
Yeah.
So Carmarthen Quins are going up to RGC. It's not a fixture anyone would have wanted to have to travel to North Wales, especially an unplanned game. I mean, you literally did not know this until obviously 4:15
Yeah.
on Saturday just gone. So that would have done Quinn's heads and their bank account a bit of a number. But even saying that, Quins have had a bit of a resurgence, not quite as strong as Swansea or Bridgend, but there's still plenty in that 23 that can do a job. There's obviously quite a few boys that could potentially come into it. If we're talking, I'm a little bit hopeful by here. But if I'm talking Scarlets boys that might come into it, is Scarlets do host Leinster. Quite recently they've used that as a game for rotation. So if they're on the same mind, then that's going to automatically rule out getting that halfback partnership of Titcombe and Hughes. I mean, he was unlikely to get Archie Hughes anyway, but you can always dream. So I am struggling to go against an RGC win. I think it is my pure belief that Steph Thomas will manage to grind something out in his team. And in fact, I have got a quick word from Steph, nothing too strenuous. If I can find it in my little, I can't find it now, can I? That's bloody typical of me, isn't it? So type his name. That's the way it's gone. So a quick word on there. Our young squad's been tested the last few weeks. Quite patched up against Newport. Disappointing end of the season. But we're going to dust ourselves off, and we're going to head to RGC. With some confidence on Saturday. So he has talked a lot about the age of his squad, especially the core of his squad. If we do again look at halfbacks, they are unless they've been bringing in Ali Thomas from Kevnathan. I mean, the average halfback age for this is got to be under 21 all season. Ellis Payne, Ellis Price, Archie Hughes, Lucas Sataro, Rodri Lewis. These are all boys who are under 20 or have been under 20 in the last season. So when you've got such inexperience at halfback, it is quite hard. And obviously, I thought that they'd come through the other side, with these their last few performances, and hopefully they really have. But it would be another prospect if I could say Charlie Titcombe was starting at 10 for Quins. If I could say 100% assurity he was starting, I'd be Quins 100%. I got no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. Do you know what, though? I think that's where Quins have struggled this year, is that halfback combination. They've just lacked that bit of leadership and quality there. Obviously, they lost Yori Badham at fullback. That's never going to be that's never going to be useful. But I don't buy that they were actually that depleted. Certainly not in terms of who was on the team sheet. I mean, the bench still had Reece Fawcett, Connor Allen, Josh Helps, Ed Sigri up front. They started Noonian, Sean Jones, Ryan Bean, Lee Taylor, and Keanu and Sean Evans from the Scarlets, which have been, that's a regular pack. It's relatively settled. Yes, they lack behind and the weaponry is just not there, I'll be honest, this season. And that's probably something they've got to look at for next year, especially because they'll be probably 2 years into this sort of plan at that stage, comfortably. But yeah, unfortunately, I think this is going to be a blowout. I don't mean to be disrespectful to Quins, but RGC are that different breed up north. Quins just don't. That Newport game has really made me stutter over what they're going to do. If you would have asked me before this Newport game, I'd be been confident that Carmarthen would have been up for this, but they fell away against Ebervale, and then they've had a few key players that comes back in, they get a result, he disappears, and then it's like they don't get a result, and it just makes you think, well, you can't be relying on these sort of players dropping in and out. But yeah, at the moment, I just don't think they've got enough in them. I don't think there's enough. You got to go to RGC with weaponry, and aside from a rolling maul, a heavy pack, there's not a lot going on for Quins. I'll be honest. They're limited behind. They've got no halfback combination really, so I can't see them competing with RGC on this one.
No, I'm really going my heart more than my head saying Quins. Yeah, my only saving grace is the fact that when Quins did go up there earlier this season, it was 29-24, and I'm thinking to say that the Quinn side back then was a little bit weaker than what we're seeing right now. I think they have improved, especially in this last month. One noticeable omission from this past week, and I'm not saying one player makes a team, is Gabriel McDonald. He's played in 16 of the 18 league games this season. He has been a mainstay. I know you don't think he's played as well as he has done as when he was with Llandovery last season.
But as you say, he's played in the majority of those games, so it's that bit of consistency you just want to have and get any young man, which he is used to it. I think his problem, and this is probably quite a harsh reflection, my words were on him, but in reality, it probably matters on who's inside of him. You look at, he had Lee Reese and Johan Hughes for the majority of his time at Llandovery. If Hughes goes off, Jack Maynard's coming on. So all of a sudden, you've got three absolute quality players at half back there. So yeah, it's just not happening for him.
Okay, so Rob is going to be eating humble words next week. That does bring us to the end of this week's show, and I'm going to give one last special chance. Do we have any Bridgend team news, or are we just leaving it? No. Oh, we're leaving it. It's terrible. Less than 24 hours before the game and no team news. It's got WRU. Step in here, boys, please. Well, actually, that might make things worse. Never mind. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Rob, for bearing with us. And we'll do it all again next week, and we will see how Swansea and Quins do in the next round of Super Rugby Cymru.
We will.
Thank everyone for listening. Bye.
Cheers all.